Percent Part 2. Foundations. Chapter 9. The Counter. The system had told me the loop had a counter, and then it had refused to tell me what the counter said, which is exactly the kind of thing that will keep a former physics graduate student up at night, even during an apocalypse. I found the counter on the 33rd loop, and finding it nearly broke me, so let me build up to it the way I had to. After the 31st loop, the first day 1, the hilltop sanctuary, the 14 of us standing inside a wall of grief while the world unmade itself around us. I had assumed, with the giddy stupidity of a man who has just won an impossible victory, that the hard part was over. We had survived the night. The choir's first tide had broken on my wall. Surely now it was just a matter of doing it again. Bigger, better, with more people, until all of Ashford stood inside the ring, and we marched on the spindle together, and closed the lock, and ended the loop a winner. Day 1 disabused me of that within about 4 hours. Because the apocalypse did not stop at midnight. It escalated. The choir was only the night tide. The days had their own program, and day 1's program was worse than day 0's in every measurable way. The Gloamspawn came in packs now, not singly. Something flew. A thing like a flayed kite, that hunted by heat and dropped on you from the seams. The dungeon roots under the town had ripened overnight, and things came up out of the storm drains that made the bruise-colored refrigerator monsters look like a tutorial, which is precisely what they had been. And the spindle, the tower, our actual objective, the lock we had to close. The spindle had grown a second floor overnight, and put out a pulse at noon on day 1 that called every monster in the sector toward it, including, I noted with sinking dread, toward the hill where we stood between it and them. We held the second night, barely. We lost 2 goblins, and Hollis took a wound that Maya spent 8 hours keeping him from dying of. We held the third night, with 3 more dead, and the wall cracked in a way that 19 points of resonance could no longer fully mean back together. On the 4th day, the flying things found a way over the wall, that a wall, being a wall, could not stop. And by the 4th midnight, there were 6 of us. And on the 5th day, the spindle pulsed twice. And on the 5th night I knelt in the dirt with my hands on a cracking wall, and watched Maya die for the 30-somethingth time, slower than ever, 6 days later than she had ever died before, and her last words were not, "Get further." Her last words were,
"Eli, how many times have you watched me die?"
I hadn't told her. I never told them the number. It felt obscene, like showing someone the date of their own funeral. But she'd worked it out, the way she worked everything out. From the way I flinched a half-second before things happened. From the worn, smooth grief in me that no 33-year-old should carry. "A lot," I said.
"Then stop watching,"
she said.
"and start learning the right thing. You keep learning how to survive longer. 6 days. Good. But the wall's still cracking, and I'm still dying, and you're still alone every morning."
Her hand tightened on mine.
"You're a scientist, Eli. You found a conserved quantity, and you've been spending it on defense. What's the experiment you're too scared to run?"
I knew the answer before she finished asking. I'd known it for loops. I'd been avoiding it the way you avoid the one result that might tell you the whole project is impossible. "I'm scared to die all the way," I said. "I'm scared there's a number, a count of how many times the loop will catch me, and I'm scared that if I go looking for it, I'll find out I'm almost out." Maya, dying, 6 days deeper into the apocalypse than any human had ever been, used her last breath to laugh at me, gently, the way she laughed at patients who were going to be fine, and didn't know it yet.
"Then you'd better find out now,"
she said.
"while you've still got some left to spend. A number you don't know controls you. A number you know, you can plan around. Go find your counter, Eli."
Her eyes were going.
"And Eli, when you find me, next loop, I won't remember this, but find me anyway. Every time. Promise."
"Every time," I said. "I promise." She died. I woke at 6:14, and on the 33rd loop, Instead of going to find Maya, instead of going to Dub or Gravy or the wall, I sat on my futon and I went looking for the counter, and I found it the way I'd found everything. By asking the system a question, I had finally earned the right to ask. How many times, I said to the empty room, to the blue panel, to the thread in the hum, will you let me come back? The system was quiet for a long moment. It had never been quiet before. The pause itself frightened me more than any monster had.
You have earned this question. The system will answer it truthfully, because you are owed the truth, and because the truth, this time, is something between a grave and a door. The loop is not infinite. No loop is. The mechanism that returns you to this dawn is powered by the same conserved resonance you have been hoarding. Every return spends a portion of the world's loop tension, and when the tension is gone, the dawn will not come again, and the next death will be the last, for you and for everyone, because the lock will still be open, and the tide will still take the shore. You have looped 32 times. The mechanism estimates it can return you.
And then the system did something it had never done. It hesitated. I watched the blue letters hang half-finished in the air, and I understood that the thing on the far side of the hum did not want to tell me the number, the way you do not want to tell a friend the biopsy result. Tell me, I said. I can plan around a number. I can't plan around a fog.
Approximately 18 more times, perhaps 20, if you die having learned a great deal, perhaps 14, if you die having learned little. The richer the death, the gentler the cost. This is why the system has been measuring your resonance with such interest. You have been treating it as a score. It is a fuel gauge. You have, at most, 20 dawns left, Elias Vance. Likely fewer, and the spindle has more than 20 floors.
I sat on my futon with that number in me like a swallowed stone. 20, maybe fewer. I had spent 32 loops learning to survive one night. The tower had more than 20 floors, and I had never reached the second landing alive. The arithmetic was not close. The arithmetic said I was going to fail, and take everyone with me, and there was not enough loop left to brute force the gap the way I'd brute forced everything else. And then I heard Maya's voice, not the system's, Maya's, 6 days deep and dying and laughing at me gently. A number you can plan around. I picked up the pencil. I turned to a fresh page in the rebuilt notebook, and at the top, where the spine of the whole story lived, under the shape of 11 days, I wrote a new heading, and it changed everything about how I spent every dawn that followed. Budget. About 20 loops. Probably fewer. Stop spending loops learning to survive. Survival is solved. Start spending loops learning to win. Every death must teach something that gets us up the tower, not something that gets us through one more night. Maya is right. I am a scientist. I have been running the wrong experiment for 10 loops. New experiment. Not, how do we live? How do we climb? And, find a way to bring the others with me. Really with me. Conserved. Like gravy. Because I can't do 20 floors alone in 20 loops. Nobody could. I need a team that remembers. That's the whole game now. I put down the pencil. Gravy crooned at me from the foot of the bed. Greasy and grievous, and there. The one warm thing the loop had ever let me keep. Okay, buddy, I said, scratching the horrible, beautiful ridge of his beak. 20 tries. Let's stop surviving. Let's go win. And then I went to find Maya, because I had promised, every time, and a promise is just information you refuse to let go of, and I had become the kind of man who let go of nothing at all. The web of the morning. Somewhere in this book there must be one chapter that shows the whole machine at once. The morning of day 0. Complete, as I finally held it. Because I have given you the web in pieces across 40 chapters. A thread here, a node there. And the pieces are true, but the holding was the thing, the actual daily artifact of 64 loops, and no keeper's training is complete, the core tells me, until they have seen one veteran's morning laid out entire. So, 6:14 to 7:30. Ashford. Day 0. The finished choreography, as it stood in the final notebooks. 76 minutes. I could once have recited this asleep. Assembling it now took me, with Maya's help and the reconstructed notebooks, 11 days. Let the gap between those two sentences stand as this book's truest measure of what the spending spent. 6:14. The light resolves. I am moving before the panel finishes. The body learned the timing around loop 9. The system eventually began omitting my welcome text entirely, remarking once that the system knows when it is being read to out of politeness. Dress, boots, pocket check, notebook, pencil, 2 protein bars, glasses. 40 seconds. 6:15 to 6:20. The salon roof. Not for observation anymore. For the signal check. Gravy, woken remembering on the floor below, takes the culvert route east. The bond confirms his start. From the roof, 3 glances. Oldest data in the war. Smoke at the Tran chimney. It means the boiler's lit. It means Mr. Tran is up. It means the alley behind the laundromat will be unlocked by 6:30. 11 downstream effects. The bus at the corner or not. Rain proxy. The sky lies on day 0 but the bus never does. And the gulls. The gulls leave the river 7 minutes before the seam's first dilation. No instrument the system ever offered me read the morning as honestly as the gulls. I asked Cass about it once, after everything. She said the seam's pre-tremor runs through the substrate.
Like a smell.
The gulls, she said, were not fleeing. They were offended. 6:21. Mom. Bathtub, stove, quiet, love you. 4 minutes. Non-negotiable. The one call the whole choreography bends around. On the tightest loops I made it walking. The Corps manuals now carry, in their opening pages, a doctrine titled the 621. Generalized. Every keeper, however desperate the day, performs 1 act per loop that exists purely because love is not a line item. The manuals say it stabilizes the operator. The manuals are correct, and missing the point. It isn't for anything. That's what it's for. 6:25 to 6:38. The spine of the run. Down Carden. Wake the night shift girl. 3rd bell. She sleeps like sediment. Her flat floods at the storm drain surge on day 2. But on day 0 she matters because she opens the laundromat early when woken, and an open laundromat at 6:50 becomes the shelter that catches the bakery queue when the running starts. 9 souls. Conserved. Every loop. For the price of 3 doorbell rings. Chalk mark the lamppost at 5th. Dubs Nation reads it. 1 stroke means day as expected. 2 means variant. Fire the contingency verse. The Whitfield grandmother, intercepted at her gate with a forged mislabeled parcel that takes her 11 minutes to untangle. 11 minutes that hold her off the corner, where she falls at 6:52, which keeps the twins from running to her, which keeps them behind the shelter glass, which keeps Theo's thread clean for the square. I tried 40 cleaner solutions across the loops. The parcel won. The web does not reward elegance, it rewards fit. 6:40 to 6:48. Mrs. Adeyemi's counter. Coffee. The 6:44. You have the chapter. Here is its place in the machine, between the spine of the run and the hard turn of the morning. The architect of the whole web stood at a counter for 8 minutes, and let a woman who would not remember him find something to approve of. Logged for years as cover ritual. Relogged here, finally, under its working name, the Keeper's 621, second instance. The machine had 2 non-negotiables, and both of them were love, and I built the entire choreography around them and told my notebook they were operational. The notebook knew. 6:49. The square begins to load. From the bank corner I can see 11 threads converging. The bakery queue, the gym pair, Sela's first scouting glance from the depot window. She assesses the square at 6:49 every loop. What she sees in it determines which Sela the day gets. On the final morning what she saw was me on the bus roof, and the rest is the hill. And on the far side, jogging, 6:31 departure, plus 18 minutes at her pace, Maya. The 6:51 seam catches her at the square's north edge. Every time, the worst exposed position on her route. The morning's hardest standing problem, unsolved for 20 loops. Anything that moves her earlier breaks the hospital thread. Anything later, the crowd thread. The solution, when it came, loop 31, was nothing I built. It was standing in the right place. Her route passes the bank corner at 6:50. A man at that corner saying the opening words moves her, voluntarily, every loop, conserved, into the recessed doorway for the duration of the proof. The doorway. The same doorway. The web kept handing me back that doorway until I understood it. The place I survived the first morning was load-bearing for the last one. Nothing in the web is scenery. Nothing, in any morning, anywhere, is scenery. That is either the web's deepest teaching or the deepest thing the web ever taught me, and after 60 years, I still cannot cleanly split those, and have stopped trying. 6:51. The seam. The bruise-colored arrival. And here the chapter must record the choreography's final form, the one the early loops could never have imagined. We do not interfere with the monster at all. The mature web doesn't fight the gloamspawn, doesn't trap it, barely acknowledges it. Every thread has simply been pre-moved out of its path, the whole square's human geometry quietly redealt across the previous 37 minutes, so that the apocalypse's opening blow lands, with its full ancient malice, on nothing. On an empty street. The kill that taught me the war, Mrs. Adeyemi, 6:53, does not happen. Not because anyone is saved at 6:53, but because everyone was saved between 6:15 and 6:48, in increments too small to witness. A parcel, a doorbell, a chalk stroke, a man standing at a corner. The finished morning contains no rescues. That is its signature. The trainees study this chapter, the Corps tells me, expecting the veteran's web to be a masterpiece of intervention, and what they find is 76 minutes of errands. And the ones who will be good at the work go quiet at exactly the right line, which is this one. At full mastery, the saving is indistinguishable from courtesy. The web's last form was not a battle plan, it was a paper route. 7:30. The square is turned, the threads are settled. The day's load is distributed onto footings, poured one doorbell at a time. The keeper stands at the bank corner with cold coffee. The only audience for a catastrophe that now arrives. Every loop, to find the town has, by what looks, from any distance, like luck, already stepped out of its way. It was never luck. It is never luck anywhere. That is the operational content of the whole soft way. And the reason this chapter sits in the training halls beside Set's sitting and Hollis's footings. What the comfortable call luck and the grateful call providence is, in every case the Corps has ever audited, somebody's 76 minutes. Somebody's paper route. Somebody who knew the web, your street's web, reader, has one. It is being walked this morning, and got up at 6:14 to deal the deaths out of the deck before you woke. Find them. Learn the route. Take a shift. That's the chapter. That's the morning. That was, 76 minutes at a time, the war. Chapter 10. Hollis and the Forge. Hollis Reyes did not believe me. The first 11 times I tried to recruit him, and I came to respect him enormously for it. Everyone else in Ashford I could win with the 20-minute proof. At 6:53, Mrs. Adeyemi sits down and dies. Watch. It worked on Maya, because Maya trusted evidence. It worked on Dub, because Dub trusted a shared protein bar. But Hollis Reyes was a different kind of animal. A 56-year-old general contractor who had spent 30 years watching confident young men describe impossible buildings, and who had developed, as a survival trait of his trade, a profound and immovable resistance to being told that the thing he was looking at was not the thing it obviously was.
So the sky's gonna tear at 6:51.
He'd say, arms crossed, leaning in the doorway of his workshop on the south end of town where he was, every single day zero, in the middle of rebuilding a transmission.
And you know this, because you're from the future.
Not the future. The same morning, over and over.
Uh-huh. And you want me to drop everything and follow you to a farm, to build a magic wall out of feelings.
When you say it like that, it does sound bad. I learned, across 11 attempts, that the 20-minute proof actively hurt my case with Hollis, because watching a monster kill a neighbor didn't make him trust me. It made him trust the monster. The monster was real and present and explicable in the way disasters are explicable. I was the suspicious part. A disaster doesn't ask you to follow it to a farm. What finally won Hollis Reyes, on the 12th attempt, was that I stopped trying to convince him and started asking him for help with a problem. My wall keeps cracking, I told him, on the 12th day 0, sitting down on an overturned bucket in his workshop without being invited, the way you sit when you've decided to be patient. 4th night, every time. It holds 3 nights and cracks on the 4th, right at the northeast curve where the ground slopes. I don't know if it's the foundation or the bond or the material, and I'm out of my depth, and I think you'd know in about 10 seconds what I'm doing wrong. Hollis Reyes looked at me for a long moment, and something in his face shifted. Not belief, not yet, but interest, because I had stopped asking him to accept a miracle and started asking him to diagnose a failure, and diagnosing failures was the thing his whole soul was built for.
Northeast curve where the ground slopes,
He said slowly.
You pouring your, whatever it is, your feelings, even, all the way around.
Yeah.
Well, there's your problem.
He wiped his hands on a rag, unable to help himself. A craftsman who has spotted the error and physically cannot leave it unspoken.
Ground slopes, the load's not even. You put even effort into uneven ground. The low side carries more and fails first. Doesn't matter if it's concrete or feelings, kid. A wall on a slope needs more wall, where the ground gives way. That's not magic. That's just footings.
I stared at him. He was right. Of course he was right. I'd been pouring resonance evenly into a ring that sat on uneven ground, and the northeast curve, downhill, bore a load the others didn't, and no amount of meaning it harder fixed a problem that was, at root, about footings. I had been trying to solve a structural failure with emotional intensity. Hollis Reyes had solved it in 10 seconds with the accumulated wisdom of 30 years of not letting young men build things wrong. Come build it with me, I said. Not because the world's ending, because I'm doing it wrong, and you can't stand watching someone build something wrong, and I am going to build the most important wall in the history of the world wrong, over and over, unless you come and make me do it right. Hollis Reyes was quiet for a while. Then he put down the rag, which I would learn was the single most significant thing he ever did, because Hollis never put down the rag for anything that didn't matter.
Show me this farm,
he said. Hollis changed the hearth, and through it he changed the whole shape of how we climbed. I had been thinking like a physicist. The wall is a field, the resonance is a potential. Mean it evenly and the field is uniform. Hollis thought like a builder, which is to say he thought about load and failure, and the specific stubborn physics of real materials in the real world, and it turned out that a hearthright's intent obeyed structural engineering far more than it obeyed wishful thinking. A wall meant by a man who understood footings, drainage, keystones, and the way stone wants to fall was worth 3 walls meant by a man who only understood grief. And then Hollis found the forge, and everything changed again. Because the larder, the dungeon under the Emberstone Hills, Gravy's old prison, had at its heart, beyond the core, a vein of something the system called hearth metal, or that had ripened in the dungeon's compressed half-real space until it was no longer quite ordinary matter, until it, too, would hold an intention if you knew how to put one into it. And Hollis Reyes, who had spent his life shaping metal that did not hold intentions, took one look at a hearthright's forge, which I raised for him in the farmhouse's old barn, a structure I meant into being a place where making mattered, and within a single loop, he was producing things I could never have imagined.
Structure recognized. Forge. Meant. The system notes that a hearthright cannot forge. A hearthright can only raise the place where forging is possible, and find the one soul stubborn enough to do it well, and get out of his way. You have done all 3. The system approves. The system rarely approves of getting out of the way. It is not, by nature, a delegator.
Hollis forged us tools that remembered their purpose. A hammer that meant to drive a tent stake drove it in one blow. A blade Maya carried that meant to part flesh cleanly for stitching, and never for harm, and could not be made to cut an ally even by accident. Hinges that meant to hold. Nails that meant to bite. And, eventually, this took him most of part 3, but I'll mention it now, a single great keystone for the hearth's gate, into which Hollis poured 40 years of knowing how things stand and fall, and which became the anchor that let our sanctuary hold against tides that would have crushed my wall of grief like a sandcastle. But the thing Hollis gave me that mattered most was not a tool. It was a sentence, spoken on the second night of the 12th loop, when the wall, built right this time, footed and drained and keystoned, held the 4th night for the first time, held it easily, held it like it had never occurred to the wall to do anything else. We stood watching the choir's tide break against the northeast curve that had failed me 11 times, and Hollis Reyes, general contractor, 56 years old, watching the end of the world fail to get past a thing he'd built right, said,
"Huh, would you look at that?"
A long pause.
"You know, kid, you keep calling this the apocalypse, but far as I can tell, the apocalypse is just a real demanding client, and I have never lost to a demanding client."
He spat into the dark, satisfied.
"Tell me about this tower we gotta climb, and tell me what's breaking on the 4th night up there, because I guarantee you something is, and I guarantee you it's footings."
It was, in fact, footings, but that's part 3. I woke at 6:14, with Hollis not remembering a word of it, and I went to his workshop, and I sat down on the overturned bucket without being invited, and I said, "My wall keeps cracking." 4th night. Northeast curve where the ground slopes, and I watched the interest kindle in his face for the 12th time, and the 13th, and the 14th, and every single time it was worth it, because a man who cannot stand to watch something built wrong is the most reliable ally an apocalypse ever gave anybody, and I would have rebuilt his trust 1,000 mornings to keep him at my back. 11 ways to fail at Hollis Reyes. I told you Hollis didn't believe me the first 11 times, and that I came to respect him enormously for it, and then I skipped to the 12th attempt, the bucket, the cracked wall, the footings, as if the 11 failures were a single gray smear of no. They were not. Every failure was different. Every failure taught me something about Hollis, or about persuasion, or about myself, and Maya insists the full taxonomy goes in the book, because, her words,
Somewhere out there is a keeper trying to recruit their own Hollis, with the same 3 bad arguments on rotation, and you owe them the other 8.
So, the complete record of my education in Hollis Reyes, failure by failure. Attempt 1. The proof. The standard opening. The one that won Maya. Come watch the sky tear at 6:51. He didn't come. That was the variable I'd never met before. Maya came to see. Sela came to assess. But Hollis simply declined to attend the end of the world, on the grounds that he had a transmission half open. When the sky tore anyway, audibly, 6 blocks away, he walked to the workshop door, looked at the seam for a slow 10 count, said,
"Huh,"
and went back to the transmission. I stood in his doorway explaining that this changed everything, and Hollis said the sentence I would hear, in variations, 11 times, the sentence that was the bedrock of the man.
"World's been ending my whole life, kid. Something always needs fixing anyway."
Attempt 2. The data. I brought the notebook. Schedules, monster taxonomies, the web of the morning, 20 loops of method. The best of me, laid out on his workbench. He read it longer than I expected. Then he tapped one page and said,
"This is good work. Whoever you copied it off, they were careful."
Copied. In Hollis's world, a young man with a perfect dossier was not a researcher. He was a salesman with unusually elaborate samples. The better my evidence got, the more it proved I was running a con sophisticated enough to need it. I wrote in the notebook that night, for some people, polish is the red flag, He trusts process, not product. Show him the work happening, not the work done. Attempt 3. The appeal to others. Maya Okonkwo believes me. The paramedic. This was the worst failure of the 11. His face closed like a gate. I learned only on attempt 9 why. A contractor of 30 years has watched 100 cons run sideways through a town, and the respectable cosigner is the con's load-bearing wall. By recruiting Maya first I had, in his accounting, either fooled a good paramedic or rented one. I'd spent her credibility and bought nothing but his certainty that I was organized. Attempts 4 and 5. Urgency, then volume. I am not proud of these. 4 was people will die tonight. True. And useless. Because urgency is the con man's oldest tool, and Hollis had a 30-year-old policy, stated flatly while turning back to the engine.
Anybody who needs my answer today gets it. It's no.
5 was me, frayed from a bad string of loops, raising my voice. And Hollis didn't even turn around. He let me run out of words in his doorway, then said, mild as a level resting on a beam,
You done? There's a broom by the door if you want to be useful while you holler.
I swept his workshop floor for 40 minutes in furious silence. It remains, in retrospect, the single most progress I made in the first 5 attempts. He let me stay in the room. The notebook entry. He didn't care what I said. He cared that I swept the corners. Attempt 6. The demonstration. I built a wall in front of him. A ment wall. A hearthrights wall. 3 feet of sand and intention in the vacant lot beside his shop. Rung it with a rebar like a bell. Magic. Performed live. No cosigner. No dossier. He walked around it twice. Tapped it himself. Listened to it ring. I watched the evidence land. Actually land. He was not a man who lied to himself about data. Then he said,
Neat trick. So you're telling me the sand is honest. Wasn't ever the sand I had questions about.
and went back inside. I stood in the lot next to my ringing wall, comprehensively out-argued, and started, finally, to laugh, and to understand that I had been climbing the wrong face of the man for 6 loops. He had never once doubted that something impossible was happening. The sky had a seam in it. He had eyes. He doubted me, and there is no demonstration for that. There is only time, and the loop kept taking my time back. Attempts 7 and 8. Honesty, then over-honesty. 7. I told him everything. Loops, deaths, the count, all of it. Plainly, the way I'd tell Maya on the last morning. He listened all the way through, nodded slowly, and said,
That's either true or you believe it. And either way, son, you need more help than I got in stock.
which was fair. 8. I doubled down with the raw version. The grief, Mrs. Adeyemi dying on schedule, the 4 names at the bus shelter, and watched it actively hurt my case. Because to Hollis, a stranger bleeding on you at a first meeting isn't intimacy, it's pressure. The notebook. He has a fixed budget of trust for strangers, and emotional spend draws it down same as any other spend. Stop spending. Start depositing. Attempt 9. The long con of just showing up. No pitch. I came at 6:40 with 2 coffees, said
Morning?
put one on the bench, and asked what he was working on. We talked transmissions. I knew nothing. I asked real questions. He gave real answers. Because a man who loves a craft cannot help teaching it. And at 6:51, the sky tore and I said,
I have to go.
and went. No explanation. The next loop, same. And on the 3rd coffee loop, attempt 11, by the gross count. As I turned to leave at 6:51, Hollis said to my back,
You always know when it's coming. To the minute. Don't even check a watch.
a long pause, the longest of the whole campaign.
One of these mornings you're gonna tell me how.
Not belief, but the door of belief, unlatched, by nothing, by coffee and sweeping and asked questions, by deposits. And I never got to collect on it, because the loop reset the account every dawn, all deposits void, 3 coffees of progress wiped to 0. Forever, the cruelest tax the loop levied. Hollis was winnable only by patience, and patience was the one currency that couldn't cross the dawn. Attempts 10 and 11 were me proving that to myself past all doubt, replaying the coffee opening with variations, watching it always land, always almost, always die at 6:14. The notebook entry after 11 is the bleakest in that stretch of the book. Cannot patience him inside one day, cannot proof him, cannot data him, cannot grief him. The man requires the one thing the loop forbids: history. Park him. Some doors don't open the loop's way. I was wrong, and the way I was wrong is the lesson I'd send back to every keeper working their own Hollis. I had been trying to transfer my knowledge of the apocalypse, of the loop, of what was coming, 11 failures. And on the 12th attempt I led, instead, with my ignorance, a cracked wall, a failure I couldn't diagnose. You'd know in 10 seconds what I'm doing wrong. And the door I had spent 11 loops knocking on turned out to open outward. Pull, not push. Hollis Reyes could not be made to receive. He was constitutionally, magnificently, a man who gave diagnosis, craft, correction, 30 years of knowing how things stand and fall, and every one of my 11 failures had been an attempt to put something into a man whose whole soul was shaped for output. Ask for help. That was the key. It had been the key the whole time. The notebook, after the 12th attempt, in handwriting gone suddenly loose with relief. You don't recruit a builder by showing him your blueprints. You recruit a builder by showing him your crack. File under, probably not just Hollis, probably everyone, a little. The pitch closes doors. The request opens them. People are not buckets to fill. People are wells that need drawing from, and the favor you ask is the bucket you lower. 11 loops to learn it. Cheap at the price. Now go ask Sela what only Sela knows. Go ask everyone what only they know. The town is full of wells, and you have been walking around it with a watering can like a fool. Chapter 11. Glyphs and the Loadout. I have been putting off explaining the loadout because it is the most game-like part of the system, and I have wanted you to feel the weight of the people first. But you cannot understand the climb without understanding the cards, so here, in the quiet of Part 2, let me teach you the deck. Every sentient had a loadout, a small number of slots. I started with 3, into which you could fit glyphs. A glyph was a physical object, roughly the size and shape of a playing card, but made of the same crystallized rule stuff as a dungeon core, cool to the touch and faintly warm in the hum, and each one held a single frozen possibility that you could spend by willing it. You got them from cores. When Gravy and I cleared the larder's heart, or when, later, we cleared deeper and stranger dungeons, the core would sometimes shed a glyph, the way a geode sheds a crystal, and that glyph was yours to keep. Or rather, yours to keep within a loop. Because here was the cruelty that shaped everything. Glyphs did not cross the dawn. Almost nothing did. Resonance crossed, Gravy crossed, held in my resonance. Information crossed, held in me. But a glyph I mined on day 2 of one loop was gone at the next 6:14, back in its core at the bottom of its dungeon, waiting to be mined again. Every loop I started with empty slots and an empty deck, and every loop, if I wanted cards, I had to go down into the dark and dig them out one more time. Except, here is the discovery that took me 4 loops and changed the entire mathematics of the climb, and it came, like most of my best discoveries, from reading a system message slowly enough.
Loadout, 0 of 3 slots. Glyphs are not retained across a return. A glyph is a possibility you have borrowed from a core. The dawn calls in all debts. Exception. A glyph that has been attuned, bonded to your resonance over time rather than merely slotted, becomes in part yours. An attuned glyph does not return to its core. It returns to you.
An attuned glyph returns to you. It was the same word, attuned, that the system had used, all the way back on the 8th loop, when it first explained the rule of the return. You keep your resonance and any glyphs you have attuned. I had glossed it then. I'd had no glyphs to attune. Now I understood it was the second great lever of the entire loop, sitting right beside the first. Slotting a glyph was instant and free and temporary. You jammed the card in, you used its possibility, and at dawn, it evaporated. But attuning a glyph was slow and expensive and permanent. It meant carrying the card unslotted, in contact with your resonance, for a long time. Days, sometimes a whole loop, letting your thread in the hum wind slowly into the card's frozen rule, until the two could not be told apart. Until the glyph was less a thing you held, and more a thing you were. And an attuned glyph crossed the dawn. It came back to you at 6:14, already yours, no dungeon diving required. Do you see what that meant? It meant the deck was the second conserved quantity. Slowly, one card at a time. Each loop I could attune, at most, 1 or 2 glyphs. The process was that costly, that demanding of resonance and attention. But once attuned, they were permanent, and they stacked, dawn over dawn, the same way resonance stacked. I had been thinking of myself as a man who reset to 0 every morning except for a single growing number. I was wrong. I reset to 0 except for a single growing number, and a slowly growing hand of cards I had earned the hard way, and would never have to earn again. I started attuning that very loop. The first glyph I ever made permanent. The first card in the deck that became, over the loops, the thing the administrators would eventually call the most dangerous loadout on the planet, was a humble one, mined from the larder's core, and the system named it
Glyph, steadfast, common, well slotted. A structure you have meant cannot be broken faster than you can repair it. While attuned, you, yourself, become slightly such a structure.
I carried steadfast unslotted against my chest for the whole of 3 loops, dying with it each time, letting it wind into me, until on the 4th dawn I woke at 6:14 and felt it already there. A card in my hand I had not had to dig for, a cool warmth over my heart, a small permanent stubbornness in the weave of me that had not been there before. The first thing the loop had let me build, that was made of rules instead of stone.
Glyph steadfast is now attuned. It will return with you. The system notes that you are the 4th sentient in its records to understand attunement before reaching Tower Floor 2. The other 3 each went on to do something the administrators are still cleaning up. The system mentions this without comment. The system is, perhaps, not entirely neutral about the administrators. You will understand why, eventually. Keep building your deck.
By the end of Part 2, by the 40th loop, give or take, I had attuned a hand of cards I want to lay on the table now, because they are the tools the climb gets won with, and a story should show you the tools before it shows you the fight. Steadfast, the stubborn card, the one that made my walls and my will hard to break. Lantern, mined from a dungeon under the dead library. While attuned, I could see the layout of a dungeon space the moment I entered it, the rearranging walls pinning themselves in my sight without my having to die to map them. Lantern alone saved me a dozen loops of flashlight deaths. After Lantern, I never had to die to a dungeon's geometry again. Tithe, the cruelest and most useful, mined from the larder's deepest pocket. While attuned, a fraction of any essence gravy or my allies earned flowed also to me, and a fraction of mine to them. A card that made a team level together instead of apart. Tithe was how 6 people climbing became something more than 6 people. Keepsake, the one that broke the rules, and I'll tell you about Keepsake when it's time, because Keepsake is the card that finally let me carry something across the dawn that the system swore could not be carried, and it cost me more than any other, and it is the hinge the whole ending turns on. For now, I had it, and it was attuned, and I did not yet dare use it. 4 cards. 4 permanent things, dug out of the dark one, dawn at a time, the slow accreting deck of a man who reset to nothing every morning and refused, with the whole stubborn weight of his class, to stay nothing.
It's a deck builder,
Maya said. The loop I finally explained it all to her. I explained it to her many loops, she forgot it many loops, but this loop she grasped it whole, and grinned the grin that made the apocalypse bearable.
The whole thing. The whole apocalypse. You start every run with nothing, but you keep your upgrades, and the run is long enough to dig out one or two more, and you do it again, and the deck gets better, even though you keep dying. Eli. Eli. You're not stuck in a loop, you're stuck in a roguelike.
I don't know what that is, I admitted.
It's a kind of game,
She said.
where you die a lot, and you keep what you learned, and you keep a little of what you earned, and you start over stronger. And the whole point, Eli, is that dying isn't losing. Dying is how you bank progress.
She was lit up now. The triage exhaustion burned off her by the pure joy of a pattern recognized.
You've been playing it like a tragedy. It's not a tragedy. It's a run. And you, my friend, have the best deck on the planet, and you've barely started building it. So stop grieving every dawn like it's a funeral.
She poked me in the chest, right over the warm spot where Steadfast lived.
And start playing to win.
I woke at 6:14, and Maya did not remember saying it. But I did. I always did. And I went down into the dark with Gravy at my side, to dig out one more card, banking progress, building the deck, playing, for the first time since the light resolved, to win. The library dungeon. Every glyph in my permanent deck has a story, and I gave you the deck as a list, the way you hand someone the tools without the tool marks. Lantern's story is the one Maya voted to restore in full, because it is the story of the strangest dungeon in Ashford and the gentlest one, and because what happened at the bottom of it is, she says, the moment she'd point to if a new keeper asked her when did he stop being a survivor and start being a hearthright. The dungeon under the dead library announced itself differently from every other dungeon in town. The larder under the hills was a predator's den. The storm drain pockets were Warren's. The one under the gym, I never told you about the one under the gym. It was exactly what you'd fear, we do not need to go back, was a fighting pit. But the library dungeon, when I first found the entrance, a stairwell behind the archive stacks that had not been in the building's blueprints, going down into a cool, dry dark that smelled of paper and rain. The library dungeon was quiet, and not the held-breath quiet of an ambush, the other quiet, the reading room kind. I went down with Gravy and full kit and 26 loops of dungeon craft, and the larder's rules failed at the first landing. There were no monsters. There were rooms, galleries, like the towers, though I didn't know the towers yet. And in each gallery, the dungeon had built something out of compressed half-real space that I can only call an exhibit. The first held the town, Ashford in miniature, perfect, alive, smoke moving from chimneys, the river running, a model of the morning at perhaps 6:40 of some loop, every figure mid-step. I spent an hour at it before I understood what was wrong, what made my spine crawl. It was not a model of the morning. It was a model of a morning that had never happened. A composite, details from dozens of different loops stitched together. Mrs. Adeyemi's sign half flipped as on loop 9, the bus at the corner where it stood only on rainy loops, my own tiny figure on the roof of the nail salon, and in the bank doorway, and at the loading dock, all at once. 3 of me, every place I had ever been at 6:40 superimposed. The dungeon had been watching. All of them watch. Every dungeon is the tower's root. Every root is an eye. I learned that later. But the library dungeon was doing something none of the others did. It was not watching for threats or worthiness. It was taking notes.
This dungeon seed rooted in a library, the system offered, as I stood in front of the second exhibit, which was the notebook. My notebook, rendered 10 feet tall, pages turning slowly in no wind. Every entry legible, including the ones I had written and erased. Dungeon seeds take the character of their ground. A seed in a mine becomes a larder. A seed in a drain becomes a warren. This seed rooted in 200 years of a town's records, in shelf after shelf of the conviction that things should be written down. And it became what you see. The system has met perhaps a dozen of these across the integrations. The archivist class. They are not hostile. That is not the same as safe. An archive's question is harder than a predator's. A predator asks, "Can you survive me?" An archive asks, Are you worth keeping?
The galleries descended chronologically, I realized. Down through exhibits of the town's deaths, loop by loop, rendered with terrible fidelity. The mall barricade, the overpass stand, Sela's water tower rationing line, the night the wall cracked on the fourth night, each one a diorama built from the dungeon's patient observation, a museum of every failure I had been present for, and some I hadn't. And at the sixth landing, the exhibits stopped being the town's and started being mine. The futon room, the roof, Mrs. Adeyemi's shoulder shaking under my hand, 10 feet tall, the 4 names scrolling blue over the bus shelter behind, the catwalk of the water tower, with a tiny figure writing in the cold. The dungeon was keeping my dead with me. It had been keeping them the whole time. Every loop, every name, every failure, independently, in parallel, the only other record keeper in Ashford, and walking down through its galleries was the first time since the light resolved that I had ever encountered corroboration, proof, outside my own skull, that the loops had happened. You cannot imagine what that was worth, or maybe, if you are a keeper, you can. 26 loops of being the sole witness, the single point of failure for an entire town's history, and here was a second set of books, and they matched mine. I sat down on the 6th landing of a dungeon and cried like a man at a reunion. Gravy stood watch, embarrassed for me in the specific way only he could project. The core chamber, at the bottom, held no guardian. It held a desk, a reading lamp of pale core light, a chair sized for a human, and on the desk, the core itself, not a pearl, here, a book, a heavy closed volume of crystallized rule with no title, and the system's panel hanging over it like a catalog card.
The archivist class does not test strength. Its core may be taken freely. Taking it ends the archive, the galleries close, the records stop, the watching eye goes dark. The exhibits below are not stored anywhere else. The system is required to state the exchange plainly. The core sheds a glyph of seeing, the archive's own eye, made portable. To gain the way of seeing, you must end the seer. There is no trick in this, there is only the price. The archive has watched you for 26 loops, Hearthright, and it has one request, which no taker of any archivist core has ever honored, because no taker has ever been able to read the request. You can. It is written in the dream evidential.
And the book that was the core opened itself to its last page, and there, in the looping script that Dub's people used for the things that mattered most, in the grammatical case reserved for knowledge that cannot be shown, the dungeon that had spent 26 loops keeping my dead beside me made its one request. Remember me unshowable. I was the one who also wrote it down. I took the core. The budget was the budget. Lantern would save lives by the dozen. Sentiment that costs other people's lives is not sentiment, it is theft. I knew all the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was right. The galleries dimmed behind us as we climbed, exhibit by exhibit, the dioramas going dark floor by floor like a town at curfew, and I stopped at the morning model on the first landing and watched it go. The smoke, the river, the 3 tiny figures of me, and I said it out loud, in Goblin, in the dream evidential, because a promise in that grammar cannot be casual. I will remember you. You were the one who also wrote it down. Lantern crossed the dawn 3 loops later. Attuned, permanent, the archive's eye, riding behind my own, the gift of seeing every hidden layout at a glance. It has saved more lives than any card I carried except Hearthfire. Every dungeon I ever walked into after, for the rest of the apocalypse, lit itself up for me like a floor plan, the archivist's way of seeing, portable, mine. But that is not why the chapter is here. The chapter is here because of what I understood on the climb out, and wrote that night, and Maya found decades later going through the notebook reconstructions, and brought to me with her hand over her mouth. The library dungeon was the apocalypse's own seed, grown from the same dark as everything that's killed us, and given a patch of ground made of records and quiet. What did the dark grow? Not teeth. A keeper. It kept the towns dead. It kept my dead. It asked, at the end, only to be remembered. So the dark is not one thing. Even the dark is not one thing. Planted in a mine and it starves things. Planted in a library and it grieves them. Which means the seeds are not the enemy. The ground is the fight. The whole war might be about what kind of ground we give the dark to grow in. File under. Too big to use yet. But I think this is load-bearing. I think this might be the whole thing, eventually. It was. EV, 60 years later. It was the whole thing. The hunger planted in loneliness grew appetite. The same hunger, planted at last in a universe of company, grew a morning, and sat down at the table. The library dungeon knew it first. I kept the promise, by the way. You have just watched me keep it. It was the one who also wrote it down. Chapter 12. Sela Ardent. I have mentioned Sela Ardent several times now, always glancingly, always with a kind of flinch, and it is time I told you about her properly, because Sela is the part of this story I am least proud of and most haunted by, and because everything that goes wrong in Part 4 goes wrong. At root, because of a choice I made about her here in Part 2. Sela Ardent was, in the first loop and in every loop, the best of us at the thing the apocalypse most rewarded and most punished, organizing frightened people fast. I have told you how she got us into the mall on the first morning, barricaded the doors, found the food, made the lists. That was not villainy. That was competence, the rarest and most necessary resource in a disaster. And on the first morning of the end of the world, Sela Ardent was the single most valuable human being in Ashford. And she knew it. And being valued was, it turned out, the thing she had been starving for her whole life. Here is what I learned about Sela across the loops. The way I learned about everyone. By watching her live the same 11 days many times. From the outside, with a God's eye patience no one should have over another person. Sela had spent 15 years as a regional logistics manager, being competent in a way no one ever thanked her for, keeping trucks moving through a world that only noticed her when a truck was late. She had been overlooked her entire adult life. And then the world ended, and overnight her exact and unglamorous skill, get the right things to the right place before people panic, became the difference between life and death, and people looked at her with naked gratitude for the first time in her life. And something in her that had been clenched for 15 years finally, catastrophically, opened. In most loops, Sela became a leader, a hard one, a frightened one, but a real one. She kept people alive longer than anyone but me, and she did it without a single loop of foreknowledge, on raw competence and will, and I have never stopped respecting that. But in some loops, Sela became a warlord. It depended on small things. It depended on whether, in the first hours, her competence was met with competence or with chaos. When the people around her were steady, Sela was steady. But when they panicked, and they usually panicked, because it was the end of the world, Sela learned, fast, that the only way to keep frightened people alive was to make them more afraid of her than of the dark. And a woman who has been overlooked for 15 years, who has just discovered that fear is a faster route to being obeyed than respect, who is watching people die no matter what she does. That woman, in about one loop out of 3, hardened into something terrible. She took the water tower. She rationed by loyalty. She put the useful on the inside of her walls and the useless on the outside, as bait, as warning, as breakwater against the tide. By day 4 of a warlord loop, Sela Ardent ruled the corpse of Ashford from the water tower on the Emberstone Hill. My hill, the hill I needed for the hearth. And she ruled it well. And she ruled it as a tyrant. And the people inside her wall lived 2 days longer than anyone else and paid for it, in a coin I will not describe. And here is my sin, and I am going to state it plainly because the whole back half of this book is the bill coming due. For a long time, for most of Part 2, I treated Sela as an obstacle to be routed around. I needed the Emberstone Hill. In the loops where Sela took it, I couldn't build my hearth there. So I learned the timing of her rise. And I learned to get there first. To claim the hill on day 0, before her competence had a place to harden. To have my wall half built and my goblins and my Maya in place, By the time Sela's instinct turned toward the high ground, so that when she came up the hill she found it already held by someone who knew exactly what was coming. And in those loops Sela, denied the water tower, denied the thing that turned her into a tyrant, became something else. She became, sometimes, an ally. A prickly, suspicious, furiously competent ally who never fully trusted me and never stopped being useful, and who I came, slowly, across many loops, to count as one of mine. But I got there first by leaving her behind in all the loops where I was busy elsewhere. I optimized my own climb, and in the loops I spent learning the tower, or the deck, or the forge, I let Sela rise into the warlord, because dealing with her cost time I had decided to spend on winning. I told myself she was a variable. I told myself the loop reset her anyway, that the warlord Sela of one dawn was wiped clean by the next, that no one was really harmed because no harm survived the return. I was wrong about that, and Maya was the one who told me so, and she told me so in the words that I have carried as the heaviest thing in my whole heavy pack.
You keep saying the loop wipes it clean.
Maya said. This was loop 41, and I'd just described, too casually, how I'd let Sela take the tower that loop because I'd been busy attuning a glyph and didn't have time to manage her.
But it doesn't wipe you clean, Eli. You remember, you're the one place all of this is saved. You told me that. It's your whole thesis. Nothing true is ever lost. So every loop where you let her become a monster because you were busy, that happened. It's real. It's saved. In you. You're not routing around Sela. You're abandoning her, over and over, and telling yourself it doesn't count because she won't remember.
Maya's eyes were steady and merciless and kind, the triage eyes, the fixed star.
But you'll remember. You remember everything. That's the deal you made. So you don't get to pretend the people you write off don't count. You're the ledger, Eli. Act like it.
I sat with that a long time. She was right. She was always right. It was the most exhausting thing about her, and the reason I'd have rebuilt her trust a million dawns. I had let myself believe that because the loop forgave everyone else, it forgave me. That a sin committed against a person who would not remember it was a sin that did not land. But I was the conserved quantity. I was the one thing the dawn could not wipe. Every Sela I had abandoned to the warlord, every hill I had taken by getting there first and leaving her to harden in the chaos I declined to help with, all of it was saved, in the one place in the universe that saved things, which was me. So in the 42nd loop, I did the expensive thing. I did the thing I'd been routing around for 30 loops. Instead of getting to the hill first and leaving Sela to her fate, I went and found her on day 0, before the mall, before any of it, and I sat down across from the most competent and least thanked woman in Ashford, and I said, Sela, my name is Eli. I know exactly what's about to happen to this town, because I've watched it more times than I can count. And I've watched you, specifically you, hold more people together longer than anyone, with no help and no warning, and get nothing for it but the worst job in the world. I'm not here to take the hill from you. I'm here to offer you the only thing nobody's ever offered you. I took a breath. A plan good enough that you don't have to become someone you'll hate to keep people alive. Come build with me. Be my second. And let's find out who you are when you're given enough instead of starved for it. Sela Ardent looked at me with 15 years of being overlooked behind her eyes, and the wariness of a woman who has learned that offers are usually traps. And she said the thing that began the long, hard, incomplete redemption that runs under all the rest of this story.
Prove the part about watching it happen. And then
A muscle worked in her jaw.
say the part about given enough again. Slower.
I proved it. I said it again, slower. And it did not fix her. Sela was not a thing that got fixed in one conversation. And there were loops after that one, where it all went wrong again, where she took the tower, where I failed her, where the warlord rose. But it was the first time I treated her as a person to be saved, instead of a variable to be routed around. And Maya, watching, gave me a single small nod, that I have kept in the same pocket as Dub's cracked glasses. The ledger, it turns out, has a cost. You remember everyone you write off, and the only way to set the books right is to stop writing people off. Even the difficult ones, even the dangerous ones, even the ones it would be so much more efficient to leave behind. Especially those. That's what Part 4 is about. That's the bill.